I was born in 1953. I am the third child of Floyd and Gloria Harris. I am a potter, a clay artist. And the reason I am is that I hold that title is because of my grandmother, Georgia Harris. Georgia Harris was my teacher. She was my grandmother. And through both of those, I got a double whammy of what it is to be a clay artist dealing with a 4,000-year-old art form.
How long have you been making pottery, and how did you first become interested in it?
I think as a child of 5, 7, 8, I lived within a quarter of a mile of my grandparents. So my grandmother, Georgia Harris, was doing clay. So I wasn't allowed to be a student at that time, but I stood back and watched my grandmother, put her hands in clay and bring forth these incredible vessels. And with that, I became intrigued at that early age. But I didn't do anything with that until I was in my early 20s. And when I was in my early 20s, I went to my grandmother and I said, I think I'm ready to be a student. I want to learn. And Georgia looked at me and she said, okay. She said, I'll teach you. But there's one stipulation that comes with me teaching you. And I said, okay. I couldn't imagine what the stipulation was going to be. And how tough could it be? So when she told me, I will teach you, Bill, but you have to become a teacher once you become a master. And I said, okay, that's easy. I don't have a problem with that. And so I became a student of my grandmother's. But I didn't really understand the value or that simple sentence of, I will teach you, but you'll have to become a teacher. What that really meant until I was probably in my late 40s, early 50s. Because then what I realized, what she gave me was a legacy that tied not only to her, but to her mother, her grandmother, her mother, her grandmother, her mother, her grandmother, all the way back to 4,000 years. So, I take those words seriously today, even though I did not when I was in my early 20s. But with age comes wisdom.
So what do you remember most about some of those early lessons with your grandmother? What stands out in those lessons?
They were wonderful, because not only were they lessons in clay, but they were lessons of life. That I didn't grow up on the reservation. My grandmother moved to the reservation as a child. She was in Lancaster County. She was born in Lancaster County. But when they did come to the reservation, it was a different world back then to what we would see as the reservation today. And it was a life that I hadn't experienced, but through having conversations on my grandmother's front porch after I had worked, coming home and just saying, okay, I'll grab a shower and head over there. But it was like I said, not only was she teaching me the art of clay, but she was also educating me in the history of Catawba. And I think today in 2025, I don't know that we're doing that. I don't know that when we're talking about what it is to be a clay artist in modern times, and what that would have meant to, let's just say, I'll use my grandmother, Georgia, to know that one of her grandchildren followed in her footsteps. And I have not reached the pinnacle of my grandmother, and I don't know if I ever will, but I'm going to make a really good run at it because of the respect and the integrity that she handed over to me as a teacher of this 4,000-year-old art form.
Do you remember your very first piece of pottery?
Oh,
What it
of course I do.
was and how did it turn out?
Well, it turned out absolutely beautiful. I grabbed up the clay, just created this magnificent bowl. And I was overwhelmed by it. And I handed it over to my grandmother. And she says, you need to wad that up and just start again. And I'm sitting there thinking, what? I give you my best. And what I understood she was gifting me was, when we can respect the clay and recognize the value of what the clay has been to the Catawba nation, who was 6,000 plus years old civilization. But to understand that there was respect and integrity with clay, and if you weren't making it your best, then what you were supposed to do is acknowledge that my ancestors would have said, let's end this. Let's just tear that apart, save the clay. And we have, in 2025, we've lost that. But yes, I do remember my first piece. And then I remember my grandmother, saying, I will dismantle it or you can.
Were there any particular techniques, tools, or stories passed down that you still use today?
All of them. Every one of them. Everything my grandmother taught me, I now teach. I inherited a cookie tin of what people would see as junk, but they were her tools. Some of those tools were hers, some of them was her mother, some of them were her grandmother's, who was Martha Jane Harris. And with that, I'm literally tied to those people through those tools. And I share those tools in my teachings today. Everything from a stone that, has been with us for, over 100 years through 3 generations, down to a refrigerator biscuit tin end that you use for scraping. Shells that were used to shape the inside of a bowl. Even down to, I have a coconut shell that Georgia used in the making of her pottery to create a smooth interior and also created that bulbous shape. So yes, I have those. She taught me how to use those, and I'm teaching others how to use those. There's a world of tools out there today for ceramic artists. And I can't help but wonder, what would Georgia do with the tools of 2025? And for some of you who do not know this, my grandmother passed in 1997. And so every time I think about when I'm doing something, I think, what would Georgia produce if she was sitting beside me today, using the tools that are now available to us?
So what have been some of the challenges you faced, especially when you were learning the craft?
I think learning is in any endeavor, I think what we want is instant knowledge. And maybe that is attainable in some things. But I think when you look at this art form, how it's evolved over the years from utilitarian to what I call clay art today, the frustration comes with learning what are the properties of the clay. How far can I stretch this? I watched my grandmother, do pieces that exceeded her grandmother in scope and in size. So, when we talk about this, it's like, okay, how far can we go? I don't know. But I encourage my students, just take a step. Because here's what's going to happen. If you never take that step forward, you're never going to know. So I think we should do what our ancestors did. And that is, when they first started doing clay vessels, they evolved to different clay vessels. And evolution came again. Evolution came with European contact. And I think that we today, as Catawba citizens, and who are tied to this magnificent art form, I think sometimes we forget that there's a duty that comes with being a Catawba citizen. And if you're going to put your hands in clay, you put your hands in clay as your ancestors did. And it wasn't about the money, it was about the integrity of that clay. And if you don't respect the clay, how can you expect outsiders to respect the art of the clay?
Tell me what Catawba pottery means to you personally.
It's hard to put into words what I feel, knowing that I am a part of 4,000 plus years of putting our hands in clay. The thing I tell people when they ask, why do you do this? It's an internal drive. I can buy a bowl for $1.50 anywhere if I want a bowl. So it's not about wanting the bowl. It's about knowing that I am drawn to this organic material. And I go to a clay source that Catawba people have been using this source for 500 plus years. So when I step out onto that parcel of land, it is a feeling that, I don't get anywhere else. It's knowing that I am doing exactly what my ancestors did. I may have a little bit more modern tool than they had, but I'm digging that clay just as they dug it. And through that process, I bring it home, I pulverize it, put it back in water, strain it, and so we're doing the same thing. But yet at the same time, it's no way I can let you see into my soul and feel what I feel when I'm on that land. I'm digging that clay. And when it's processed, I go into my studio, and with that, I create. So I don't have the words. I have the passion, I just don't have the words.
Yeah, that's fair. In your opinion, what role does pottery play in keeping Catawba culture and identity alive?
This is a hard one, I think, because there are many ways to address what happened to Catawba. But I think when you look at most indigenous communities, the first thing that come up is, we gave away such and such. Well, in many ways we didn't give it away. We were made to give it up. So, in order for indigenous communities to survive, they had to give a lot of themselves away as the Europeans' numbers grew. So we were no longer the majority. And when we became the minority, as one of the great chiefs of Catawba said, you know, if we do not assimilate, they will literally destroy us. So we were made to give away, I think, our religion. We were made to give up our language. We were made to, you know, to not look different. But yet, through everything we gave up, we did not gain equality. So, what did we gain from that? I think very little in the grand scheme of things. But one thing we did not stop doing, and we haven't yet stopped doing, is we have yet to stop putting our hands in clay. What archaeologists will tell you today, there's never been a generational stop. 4,000 plus years. Where one generation said, I don't know, we're not going to do this anymore. And I recall, as a student of Georgia, and we were talking about me becoming a teacher in the future, she said, you know, Bill, do you want to be the generation that says, you know, 4,000 years is enough? And at 20, you know, I'm sure I gave her a flip remark. At 70 plus, I find myself thinking, you know, you don't want to be the generation that says enough is enough.
Are there certain forms, designs, or techniques that hold special meaning or symbolism for you?
I think for me, when you looked at some of the traditional forms that, and like I said, archaeological digs have shown us, you know, what the indigenous people were producing before European contact and what they were producing after European contact. And you can see the difference. But I think the other part of it is some of our shapes we maintained, even though there was European influence. So I think it's some of those early vessels that we look at today and think, okay, I understand this vessel was created for storage. And I think once you start looking at the pieces and understanding why they were created, whether it was for cooking, storage, dry or wet, you start to get a better idea of what it is to be a Catawba clay artist in 2025.
I feel like we've touched on this a little bit, but how do you feel when you're working with clay?
There are days, God, I can do no wrong. And then there are days I don't have enough money to buy a right. So, being creative, and I think everybody is creative in something. And that creative side, what we know is sometimes it's there, and sometimes it isn't. But we don't find that out in the beginning. We find that out after we've gotten so far into it that it's not going to happen today. But the thing I do enjoy about Catawba clay is I can have an idea of where I want to take a piece. And sometimes the clay will let me get there, and sometimes the clay will turn me into another direction. And what I've learned is if the clay is turning you, follow the clay. Because now you're in conflict with between your mind, your fingers, and the clay. And you definitely want the three of those in harmony.
Yeah. How do you see pottery fitting into the story of Catawba people today?
I think we as a nation need to teach people to understand that Catawba clay is, I never like using the word sacred, because I always feel like that is one of those words where it's going to create, 10,000 different definitions. But for me, what I see as Catawba clay is, I'll go back to, we have never stopped for a generation in 4,000 plus years. So I think as a nation, we need to be saying to our youth, to our teens, tell me, how do you put a value on this? And let them answer that question to themselves.
So I think this transitions well to the next question. Why is it important to continue teaching Catawba pottery?
Well, this is what I tell everybody. I'm not saying I'm the best teacher, but it doesn't matter if you're the best teacher if you don't have students. Who do you teach? So the knowledge will die with you if you do not have students. And I think that's part of what we need. That was what was instilled in my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, and my grandmother. But it wasn't spoken in the words I just used. They just knew it. If I don't do this, who will? And am I willing to turn it over to someone else? So I think we need, as a nation, need to instill within our youth what clay means and how that clay it's still working today.
Have you had opportunities to mentor others, and what has that experience been like for you?
I have had the opportunity to mentor others, and it's been an absolute nightmare.
I knew you were going to say that.
The thing I understood what my grandmother shared with me was, I will teach if you become a teacher. You'll have to become a teacher. And I teach with that same philosophy. I'll teach you, but know this, the knowledge I'm gifting you comes with dedication on the student. And I press that every moment I can to have everybody understand, And here's the other part that I think that our citizens need to lock in on, is that currently I think our citizenship is about 4,000. Out of that, you probably have 3,000 adults. Out of that 3,000 adults, how many of them are saying, if we don't get on track, we're going to be somewhere in the next couple of generations, we're going to stop that, we're going to lose that record. So, it's left up to us as citizens of this nation to recognize what we have, others don't have. And if we don't value it, how can we expect others to value it?
So what do you hope for your students or other young potters? What do you hope that they learn, not just about clay, but also about being Catawba?
Being Catawba is, let me stop here and go back. Catawba did not have a written language. So a lot of our history is recorded by those who did have a written language. So when we talk about Catawba history, it is being told from someone else's perspective. But Catawba has an incredible history of survival, perseverance, patriotism, recognizing the value of what it is to live as a free person. And they fought on the side of the rebellious English people who were part of the 13 colonies who didn't no longer wish to be part of the mother country. And Catawba saw the value in it. And they said, we will fight with you. Now, what did we gain out of that? It's another part of sad history.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna change directions a little bit and kind of go back to your art. What are some of your favorite pieces that you've made, and why are they special to you?
Gosh, I think, as I said, I think my grandmother was absolutely the best. I don't think I have shamed my grandmother in my art, but I will still say I have not reached the pinnacle that Georgia reached in her art. But what I learned from my grandmother was, you never know if you don't push it. You don't know if it's going to work or not. So I push my work. And I'll show you an example of me pushing my work. Traditional shape, medicine bowl. I added the crow. And the reason I added the crow was my grandmother and I talked about crows from as long as I can remember having a conversation with her. And she always talked about how smart crows were and how they were able to interact with people. So I saw the crow as a symbol of not only time with my grandmother, but it was a shared respect for that blackbird that is absolutely brilliant. And even though my grandmother did not say this, I think it was hinted at. Crows, well, birds in particular, are messengers to the other world. So I think even though we don't acknowledge that in the year 2025, I think somewhere deep within our souls, we acknowledge it, and that's enough for me.
Are there any moments in your pottery journey that stand out, like particular shows you've been a part of, or exhibits, or a teaching experience, anything like that?
I have been gifted with recognition in the past 3 years that I never saw coming. I was the Taproots Foundation, which was affiliated with ACTA, put together 25 artists across America as recognizing their folk art, their tradition. And I was one of the first 25 recipients. I know that they rolled over to a second year and had recipients for 2025. But I don't know if they're going to find funding to go to 2026. So, but to know that when you play with the numbers of people who live in the United States, I was chosen 1 out of 25 for that recognition out of 300 million people. So I don't know how to minimize that. And I think the thing that keeps coming back to me now is I was contacted by Handworks, who is working with the Smithsonian. They're putting together a show for 2026 that is addressing the 250 years of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And there were 10 people 10 artists throughout all of America who were chosen for that show in 2026. I was one of the 10. So, do I wear that as a badge of honor? You better believe I do. And to know that I have a piece that will be a part of the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Institute.
So what advice would you give a young Catawba person who wants to learn Catawba pottery?
Patience is the first thing I'll tell you. I will say, let your passion pull you in, but allow your patience to give you the ability to learn. Because if you put those two together, it is an incredible force. When you can combine passion and patience, then what you get is this. Because you slow down enough to know how far you can go, or where it will take you. And then the other part is, allow your passion, allow no one ever to take away your passion. I've had the fire god smash me against the ground a few times. And I did stumble. But I picked myself up, knock off the dirt and the ashes, and go back to the studio. Because it's that passion that keeps me going back to that studio, back to putting my hands in clay, back to encouraging students to become a student. You are part of something that, and you have control of this. You as a Catawba student have control of this. They cannot make you, no one can make you stop making Catawba vessels. That will be left up to you.
What do you want future generations to remember about this tradition and about your part in it?
First and foremost, I think the most important thing for anybody, Catawba citizen, non-Catawba citizen, non-Indigenous person, to recognize what you have in your backyard is something nobody else has in their backyard. So take the time to look around and acknowledge, as neighbors, part of the community, you are witnessing 4,000 plus years of continuous art, and you didn't even know it. Take the time to learn why did they keep doing it? Because at one point, it was basically selling for pennies. Undervalued, underpriced, and not recognized as art. I think the year 2025, we're getting a sort of a renaissance of this is art. But I think also it's left up to us as individuals to actually say, when I fire that piece and I take it out of my house and put it into a seller's market, is it the best I can do? Because when I do my best, I am representing Catawba Nation and that 4th Annual Art Form. When I'm doing crap, I'm representing Catawba Nation and our 4th Annual Art Form.
So what do you want people to remember as your legacy with Catawba pottery?
Integrity. If we as individuals are not willing to recognize the value of what this art is, then how can we expect others to value it and respect it? If we don't give it integrity, no one else can.
All right. Any final words that you would like to share?
I think the first thing I want to say is, It is hard work to do Catawba clay. It can be extremely frustrating, but it can be so rewarding. So, if you're looking for instant gratification, I don't think clay is where you need to go. But, if you want to be a part of your ancestors who saw the value in putting their hands in clay just to create, go put your hands in clay.